Hello everybody. I'm going to be talking you through the basic buttons that you need to know for simple object creation in 3D Studio Max. So let's get started. Um, Up at the top here you have your basic undo and redo controls. Undo is pretty popular if you make any kind of mistakes. Say I make a box and I want to undo the creation of that box, and just click my undo button, or I can redo that. Pretty convenient. I'm going to breeze across a lot of these. The drop down here has to do with a filter that will allow you to basically select certain objects in the scene. So, for example, if I have some geometry as well as some lights in my scene, I'll just put 3 lights in here, and then I'll put another sphere in the scene. Okay, if I use this drop down and I pick, say, lights, and I try to select any of my geometry, it won't let me. So it's kind of a selection filter, which is somewhat helpful sometimes. More often than not, it's, whatever, some special situation that you'll need that, but I hardly ever use it. So moving right along here, this is extremely helpful. Select by name. Say for example this object, which is called box01, gets lost, and my navigation or my viewports are currently not fixated on that object. If I click on this select by name, I can basically pull up a whole entire list of objects that are in my scene. So this is really helpful, especially if I can't currently see the object in my viewport. So I'm going to click on box 01 and click OK, and then I'm going to use my keyboard and push the Z key, and what Z will do is focus all my viewports in on that selection. So this is extremely helpful, and it will help you in more than one situation, especially when you're first starting 3D Studio Max. The next button here has to do with how you select your objects. So by default, it won't actually let you push it down. It's just a constant, selection. So if I just illustrate this on the screen, if I click and drag, I have a rectangular selection mode. So this is good for basic object selection. There's also other different ways that you can select objects in this drop down. There's a kind of like a circular selection mode. You can click and drag circle over things. There is a freeform lasso tool where you can click in, you can drag a selection over an object, as well as an airbrush mode, which is really cool if you have to paint a selection, maybe of polygons or vertex points or something like that. So this is just holding down the left mouse button and moving over objects will let me paint over them. The next 3 are probably the most important, and their keyboard shortcuts are W, E, and R: move, rotation, and scale. And these will help you tremendously in manipulating your objects in the scene. Each one of these transforms, that they're called, are given a what's called a gizmo that will show you how you can transform the object in 3D space. Each gizmo is slightly different, but each acts similar, in which you can only highlight certain axes or multiple axes to move the object. So, for example, the move transform will allow you to move an object only on Y if you have that current arrow picked. If you pick X, it's constrained to X. Z, constrained to Z. If you move it in the middle, it will allow you to move it in both of those axes at the same time. This whole idea kind of goes through with the rest of them. So my rotation constrained to one axis, another axis, my Z, and in the middle of the rotation is actually a free rotate. So I guess rotation's a little unique, but scale is definitely similar to movement, where you can have multiple axes selected and then manipulate and scale the object. Moving right along, we have these are called snap tools, and you can think of these as ways to limit the movement of objects in your scene. So one particular useful snap tool is the angle snap, which will only allow you to rotate an object based upon increments of rotation. The default, which can be changed, is 5 degrees. So if I use this angle snap toggle and use a rotate, then I'll be able to rotate my object in increments of 5 degrees, which is really helpful if you need to rotate something exactly 9 degrees. You can change the snap properties by right-clicking the buttons. And here you have your angle snap toggle, percentage snap toggle, and so on and so forth. Moving right along, you have selection sets, which have to do with keeping track of things in your scene that you want to recall later. If there's several different objects in your scene that you want to keep track of, let me just make a couple copies here. Say I want to select this box and this sphere. I can click in this dialog here and give it a name, like my selection. Hit enter. Now if I deselect these two objects, I can come back to this drop down and recall that selection. So this is kind of the basic idea with that. The ABC on the left just has to do with managing those selections that you create. Now, material editor is very important. This is where everything is pretty much created for your objects. This is what makes a box look like, you know, a piece of marble or a piece of wood, or this is kind of where everything kind of culminates, because without materials you're really not going to have a whole lot of realism to your objects. They're just going to be colors. So in the material editor, this is kind of where this happens, and the icon is those 4 spheres. The keyboard shortcut is M. The last 3 buttons have to do with rendering your scene, and scene meaning the current active viewport. If I go back to my 4 views here, my render dialog will only render what my active view is, which is currently the perspective view. So if I click on my render setup, it'll bring up my settings for my rendering, and at the very bottom you'll see the current view is perspective, which is my current active view. Now if I click render, the render scene dialog will come up, and it will render my active view with whatever settings that I have. Now currently I think I added some lights, so it's a little bit dark, and I need to adjust my lighting so that this looks a little bit better. So I'm going to close this, and I can close this too. I'm just going to move my lights up so that they appear slightly above the objects. I might want to use my top view. This is very helpful because when you're trying to arrange lighting, it's always good to see things from multiple viewports. As well as modeling, you need to look at all your different views, not just perspective when you're doing things. I'm going to render this again. Oops, I used the wrong dialog, so I'm going to go to render setup, and I'm going to pick perspective and then render. That's a little bit better. So what happened was my lights were a little low, so I brought them up, and now it's kind of showing a little bit more surface area. There's no real plane or anything, but still you can at least see those boxes. So this is